Story 1. Case Report 7591. Details of this story have been changed or censored by the State Court of Illinois and by those persons involved in this case whose safety or reputations could be damaged by such information being released to the public. In 1959, a small town in Illinois suffered from an economic blow after a Chevrolet automobile factory was shut down during their period of decline. Many of the citizens tried to bring forward their own personal ideas for reviving the economy. A man named Travis Leroy, who owned a large plot of farming land near the edge of town, decided to use the opportunity to pursue what he claimed to be a long-forgotten childhood dream of his, and opened an amusement park in hopes of bringing in tourism from nearby cities. Travis wasn't very well known by the rest of the town and had always been fairly quiet, but he had never said an unkind word to anyone, and he didn't have a single enemy to speak of. A few of the other men in town were hired to help plow the land down and assemble the buildings and decorations for the mechanical rides and carnival stands. Most of the rides were generically shipped in and set up on spot without much effort, but there was one custom attraction in particular that was assigned the most care and preparation by the founder of the project. It was an original idea of Leroy's that he insisted on including in the park, as it was one of the few things he had specifically envisioned as part of its final opening. It was a slow indoor track car ride that would be lit and decorated to appear like an enchanted forest, complete with different animatronics of animals and lifelike statues of pixies, fairies, and other magical woodland creatures. Leroy personally had the statues and moving figures brought in from a larger outside company, and the rest was easily constructed with nearby shrubbery and donations from the town's taxidermist. Before Travis officially opened the park to the public, he insisted on doing a final walk-around on his own as he marveled the creation and assured himself that everything was perfect for its first day of general admission. Once it was approved to his standards, the local children were abuzz with anticipation to see it, and the attraction was an immediate sensation in the region. The park was successful for many months, and was immediately bringing in more revenue and income to the surrounding community, as well as to all the townspeople who were employed in many of the stands and vending booths. As a whole, the place was well loved by all and commonly visited. But as time went by, it was clear that the enchanted forest was not entertaining as many guests as some of the other rides or games. However, when it was suggested to Leroy by any of his employees or associates to shut down the ride, he would immediately cast off the idea and become seemingly offended because it wasn't using up very much of the profits on maintenance or repairs. The majority of those who asked never argued otherwise, and the subject was eventually dropped completely. After a few years of the theme park thriving and growing, one of the local 4-year-old boys was reported missing after disappearing in the ravine by his backyard on the outskirts of town. Traces of evidence were found in the brush near the other side of the creek, a shoe and some locks of hair, but there was no sign of blood or violence. The case was eventually concluded as an animal attack and closed by the parents and the Department of the State. Even after its close, some citizens were suspicious of the lack of evidence or remains found of the toddler by search parties or authorities. The suspicions never came to much fruition, as coyotes and wolves stalking unwatched pets and children was not uncommon for the area. Then, 5 months later, another child went missing in an outside county. It was nearly an hour's drive to the park and its town, and thus was barely noted by many around, at least not until the town's sheriff and pastor brought to attention that the circumstances of the missing child, as well as the lack of evidence and general surroundings, were very similar to each other. Upon the pastor's further investigation, it was also discovered that the two children were very similar in appearance. They both had dusty blonde hair near the same length, and were both round-faced boys with similar heights and complexion. Police launched into further investigation and were unable to find any other connections over 2 weeks of questioning and researching each victim's family. About a month into the reopening of the cases, the mothers of the boys noted that they had both taken their children to the local theme park within 3 weeks of their disappearance and notified the detectives. The entire staff was interrogated over the matter and the lot was inspected, but most of employees were unaware of the disappearances even occurring, and there was no suspicious findings in the park. Travis Leroy was put under the most thorough questioning, being the owner of the property and main executive manager of the establishment, but answered the majority of the questions with ease. He had seen neither of the boys in the park the days they visited and spent most of his time during park hours in his office or in the maintenance backlots. The case was again closed without further evidence until another disappearance a few miles down the ravine from the brush. The first child's traces were found. This child was a girl of 3, but again matched the appearance of the other boys, having short blonde hair and round, rosy cheeks. After the parents of the girl were brought in for search and investigation, it was soon discovered that they had also just visited the theme park only a few days before. The park was then officially shut down by authorities until further notice for an intricate search and investigation, much to the outcry and complaint of the town receiving its valuable income. The rides were dismantled and the offices were cleared, but no undeclared components or secret areas were found anywhere, even after a search of Travis Leroy's living quarters and the homes of a few other managing staff members. Nothing was found to be connected to any of the missing children. The only area noted by detectives that had yet to be investigated was the building housing the forest ride, due to the lack of installed lighting and commonly used exits, because the only usable lights in the ride were the colored atmospheric yard lamps set up through the trees and across the ceiling. The police did the majority of their search using flashlights and lanterns. Nothing was found out of place on the track or in the cars themselves, and most of the officers seemed to be somewhat impatient to leave the area. However, the head detective became especially curious of the few display cases set up through the ride of the fairies and sprites. He requested that Leroy allow him into the cases, which Leroy denied by saying they were completely sealed off in glass and had been since the opening of the park. The detective, he was still unsatisfied, but let the owner and his employees off without a problem. Later that night, according to the head detective himself, the detective used his warrant of the premises to search the ride again on his own and attempt to find a way into the cases. He wasn't able to manage a way in. But what he did discover was that the sealant bordering the corners of the glass paneling was still fresh, suggesting it had recently been opened and resealed. This piqued the detectives' concern enough to request another search of the building with assistance from the other officers on the case. Leroy was insistent that opening the cases would permanently damage the integrity of the display and the ride's condition, but after several different debates of policy and warranting, the police were finally able to surpass Leroy's complaints and permitted inside under state policy. On March 18, 1963, a party of 7 different police officers and investigators entered the enchanted forest ride in search of further evidence of the missing children. After only 2 hours of inspection and investigation that day, the park was immediately dismantled and the town nearby went down in local infamy, despite most citizens not knowing the details of their discoveries. What was found in the ride was said to be so disturbing that the photographs taken for evidence were strictly kept from the public, and many of the officers in the party refused to recall the experience. The group of authorities walked into the building and followed the car track around its winding bends and turns through the different displays before stopping at the first glass case about halfway through the ride. Armed with crowbars and paint scrapes, the police were able to separate the first wool panels and split the rubber-like seal in a little under an hour. Immediately, the scent of stale air and embalming chemicals were evident from the box, which was not unexpected due to the multiplicity of taxidermy animals in the case to complete the forest ensemble. But there was a different smell beneath the formaldehyde and thin layer of dust that left the party uneasy and a few feeling ill. It was described as a bitter scent with a hint of sweetness, similar to that of spoiled meat and rancid flowers, as one described. As the men delved further into the case, they seemed to agree that the smell was emanating from the statues and figurines. The hit detective approached one in the middle, a small dark-haired sprite in a homely outfit of overalls and hat, who was staring curiously up at the ceiling and holding a preserved bird perched on his fingers. He peered closer at the figure's expression and stared into its lifeless glass eyes before quickly being overpowered by he previously noticed smell. Covering his face with his sleeve, he continued meticulously inspecting the sprite to find what the source of the odor could be. While searching it, he noticed that there was almost a faint hint of freckles on its cheeks, under what looked like a thick layer of lacquer or resin. What happened next sent the whole of the group into a fit of disgust, and one man had to rush from the building to vomit outside. The detective raised his hand to scrape away a layer of the enamel from the sprite's face and sample it for later testing, but instead of peeling back a flake of enamel, a large chunk of the figure's cheek fell away under his fingernail and dropped to his feet. Beneath the layer of flesh-tone covering was what seemed to once be living raw flesh and muscle, long congealed and dried from years of preservation and stagnant presence in the glass box. The detective quickly swabbed the flesh for sampling before excusing himself outside, as the smell and the atmosphere of the area was becoming too overwhelming for him and the others to handle. More authorities were sent in after, and the rest of the displays were open, all proving to hold the same grotesque odor and stale air of anise. All figures and statues were inspected, and almost all prove to show the same conclusion. After the entire ride was emptied and investigated, a total of 17 children's remains were recorded to be held in the ride's displays, 3 of which were the bodies of the missing boys and girl from the previous months. A few were Unidan, Typhi, and the rest were found to be long-lost children of the nearby townspeople or others from a near area. The youngest child found, an infant no older than 12 to 16 months, was found to be T, the son of none other than Travis Leroy himself, who was said to have died at birth along with his departed wife. Leroy was immediately arrested and charged with the first-degree murder of all 17 children, and the park was permanently closed. Most of the other rides were dismantled and returned to their original owning companies, but the majority of the citizens refused to approach the building of the enchanted forest. The townsfolk held to the strict belief that the land was drenched in evil, and ill fortune would come upon any who entered it again. An outside construction team, unaware of the lot's past, was hired to dismantle the building. A few years later, they refused to complete the task after being unable to remove the sickening smell and reporting sounds of children's distant laughter. The town left it abandoned after that, but kept very careful watch on it to keep any outside tourists or journalists from breaking in. To this day, the building still stands. The other scraps remaining of the park on the plot of farmland near the edge of town. There have been no reported entries of the building or visits of the property since. Story 2. Creep. The Internet is a vast universe of its own, connecting all of humanity. So much information and entertainment at the click of a button. Creators all over the world posting endless works of art in hopes of gaining recognition. Some are stumbled upon by mere accident. Some go unnoticed forever. Then there are those who gain recognition by how utterly disturbing or cryptic their art projects are, and make videos based off famous horror or murder stories from the Internet. Please do not ignore this story and write it off as some lame-ass wannabe writer spinning you a tale. Back in high school, me and a group of friends used to get together after school and on the weekends to surf the web in search of amateur art gems, as we called them. Hours and hours of videos and stories scatter it among the tabs of our laptops. We were really into horror stories and things of a cryptic nature, seeing if we could solve the mysteries behind them. We always had our theories and thought of ourselves as pretty aware of what the artist was trying to get across. There were 4 of us, me, Danny, Josh, Seth, and Michael. It was late May 2016. We had just finished out our year of high school. Finally, it was over after all these years. I was on my way out of the school doors when Michael caught up to me and asked if I had any plans. No, I replied. He asked if I wanted to go to his house and check out a website he had stumbled upon. Dude, I found a website where amateur artists post their art projects, and bro, it is amazing. I could tell that he was excited about it, and seeing how I considered our group art connoisseurs of sorts, I agreed. We stopped at my house on the way so I could get my laptop, then proceeded to Mike's house, calling Seth and Josh to meet us there. Once at Mike's, we headed to his basement and began our journey into the newly found website. We were engrossed in this new world. video after video, story after story, before we can. It was 3 a.m., and none of us could head home, so we just stayed there that night. Our next session was only a couple of days later. Seth had called us up, and we once again met at Mike's. Once we were all there, Seth explained that he had found a user on the website who posted regularly and had very interesting content. The user went by the name XXA_real_creepex. I remember thinking about how it was a clever play on the word real as in existing and real as in video. His videos were pretty popular for the website, each with around 500,000 views. He was also very social from what we could tell, almost always replying to every comment on all of his videos, which was another draw-in for us automatically. The videos were projects with twisted takes based on creepypastas, some of the not-so-well-known ARGs, and other stories of horror, murder, and the paranormal from the web. Josh was the first to notice this fact and pointed it out. After about the third video, all of the projects were well made for the most part, and anywhere from 5 to 30 minutes long. He was very creative, doing animated videos as well as creepy music and non-animated videos. Creep, as I will now refer to him, always kept himself concealed in some form in his videos when they weren't animated. Sometimes it was a mask and hood or other costume, and other times it would be too dark to notice any distinctive features he may have had. This just added to our fascination and curiosity of this user and his projects. We only had 2 more sessions that first week, while promising on to watch with each other to avoid spoiling videos. I unfortunately didn't keep that promise, but refrained from spoiling any of the videos for my friends. I watched a couple based on creepypastas that I will not go into detail on, and one that stood out to me. This particular story wasn't a pasta. It happened to be a murder story from the internet way back in the day about a girl who was abducted and buried alive. The cops searched for the girl, but never found her. This wasn't a well-known story, but Josh had actually ran into it a couple of years back and showed us during one of your sessions. I recognized it right away. The video started out in a dimly lit basement or cellar of sorts, a girl or young woman, and be heard crying and pleading for Jason to please stop. Then another video pops up in the corner like another camera is showing simultaneously, and it's inside of a casket with the girl. Creep proceeds to bury her alive. Then the video ends. The video was a bit unsettling, but not too shocking or crazy for an amateur project. Plus, he had female characters in videos quite often he also didn't see, so the feeling didn't last very long. The next week, during a session, Mike suggested that we comment on one of Creep's videos. I believe this was a good idea, since it seems that he normally replies to the comments on his videos. Having already read accounts, we proceeded to send him comments on how much we enjoyed his videos and how we were a group of friends and would like to chat with him sometime. He answered each of us back within 10 minutes, and each response was authentic. He also sent us a link to a chat room. We all typed back and forth, asking him questions, as he would answer back with very entertaining responses. This went on for about an hour, and toward the end of the chat session, Creep said he had to go, and we thanked him for his time. He ended the chat asking what is art, and then left it struck us as odd, but we quickly casted it aside. Within the next few weeks we chatted with Creep only one other time. He told us that he was 36 and his name was Jeremy Pritter. He explained growing up he wanted to be in the film industry, particularly the horror genre. He had started college at Cal Arts after graduating school, but shortly quit after receiving criticism from teachers and other students. He had struggled creating anything for a few years until he found this website. It was such a sad story that I still remember how bad I felt when I first heard it. We all told him how we were glad he was doing what he loved again and assured him we thought he was a very unique and talented artist. He replied, with art is beauty and beauty is in the eye of the beholder. We chatted with him a few more times that summer, but nothing of grave importance. We continued watching the videos. He would post regularly and go back and watch videos that he had uploaded in the past. He had been on the site since 2012, and this was 2016, so there was plenty of content to watch between new uploads. On Christmas Eve, there was a poll on the channel that asked us to vote on the next video. He would be Ma King. The choices were to stories from the internet about murder. One was of a girl who had went on vacation and met this guy who explained that he recently had gotten a divorce and was out trying to mingle. She got too trusty, and he ended up drowning her in the ocean and took off with everything she owned. The other was of a girl who had went with a couple of her friends to a cabin for a week. While their mysterious things kept happening to the girls before they ended up going missing, never to be seen again. Of course, the second video won the polls, and Christmas Day the video was up. It was very disturbing, as was the previous murder story video I had seen. It was dark and in the woods, with who we assume is Creep sneaking around. There's a light snow on the ground, and he ends up at this cabin. He starts peeking through the windows, and of course there are 3 girls in the cabin, but you can't really make out what they look like because the ice and fall on the window. He ends setting the camera down outside of the door, grabs an axe, and proceeds to break in once, and you can once again hear the screams of women. Then only 2 of the women are screaming, but louder as Creep is grunting loudly as if he is swinging the axe around with major force. It then cuts to the man picking up the camera, as what you can see to be blood drops are in the snow as he proceeds to chase down. And the last girl, the other girl, was killed during the cut. We guess it's not clear. He then catches the last girl, never revealing her face. Then all we hear is one last scream, then Merry Christmas on the screen. We were all a little uncomfortable after seeing it, but that's what this guy's videos were supposed to do, so we brushed it off. A couple days later, he announced he'd be having a surprise giveaway for one lucky contestant. All you had to do was comment your name and come up with a clever video theme. The most creative theme would win, and he'd private message the winner for shipping the tales. The 4 of us were so psyched we knew that we'd have a good shot at winning if we all pitched and came up with 4 amazing ideas. We worked for hours until right up to the deadline and tore them in. A few hours later, Seth received a private message saying he had won the giveaway and asked for his address, that it would be there on the day after New Year's. Knowing he would be out of town with his family on that day, we decided to use my address instead. The day after New Year's finally arrived. I had been waiting forever for that day to come. The package arrived around 4 p.m. Eastern Time. As the doorbell rang, I felt an overwhelming excitement rush through my body. I signed for the package, noticing that something was a bit off about the delivery guy. He wasn't Dr. Eston any Logos, and he had sunglasses on even though it was cloudy and 30 degrees outside. But I chalked this up to him protecting his eyes from windburn. I mean, the rest of his face was covered up also, so why not his eyes? I wanted to open the package, but I waited until the four of us were able to get back together and do the grand reveal. Once settled and ready to open the package, Mike asked if he could do the honors. We all graciously agreed. Mike carefully tore open the package, making sure not to damage any of the contents. He stuck his hand in to pull out something wrapped in a piece of cloth and leather. The cloth was very tattered, and the leather was very odd. He then unwrapped the object inside, being the first to get a glance. A look of shock, horror, and disgust came over his face. It was a human jawbone with some teeth intact. We couldn't believe it. Once we finally got our thoughts together, Seth went and called the cops and reported the whole incident. When the cops arrived and were questioning us, I remembered the other murder videos and suggested the cops check those out. They eventually brought in the FBI, who searched the videos and noticed pitch differences in the screams of the victims. This and the fact the DNA from the jawbone matched a missing person in Oregon sparked the FBI to find the IP and track the location of the post. The videos were all uploaded from a quiet location in California. Upon investigating the location, a house of horrors was uncovered. Over 32 bodies found buried upon the property, even the girl in the casket and the 3 girls in the cabin, plus many more. He didn't make videos of the ages range from children to adults mid-40s, just to think a sociopath who got away with countless murder. And posted for the world to see. What did we do? Every one of the hundreds of thousands who watch his murder spree wrote it off as an art project. How many others have got away with these kind of crimes? These were all questions that have faded since the events of that day. The cops never found the man who copied internet horror stories in real life. One of the few who may actually be like Jack the Ripper or the Zodiac, who are never truly found guilty of their crimes. Please never be like the countless people who witnessed this tragedy unfold and mistake murders for a simple art project. Story 3. The Expedition. Andrew Sullivan was a wealthy man with his wife and his son before he made his billions from founding internet companies. His company survived the crash that took out his inexperienced competitors and thrived in the vacuum they created. Time passed, and Andrew and his family were happy. His son was growing up into a responsible, mature man. Andrew had seen what wealth had done to people, and he kept himself and his family humble. He taught his son that money was not the most important thing in the world, and led by example. Andrew would donate his money, most of the time anonymously, to various causes, and didn't spend his money on frivolous things like cars, planes, and boats. They lived in a house that was large, but not larger than it need to be. They had house staff, but they were treated more as family. Andrew never wondered how long their happiness would last. He didn't want to tempt fate, but unfortunately was never his decision to make It was around 9 p.m. on a winter night. Andrew's wife was driving home from a charity dinner. She was always cautious when driving on these roads, especially at this time of night when ice could easily form on them. That night, no amount of caution would help her as her car slid off the road and into the rocky valley below. Andrew was assured that his wife's death was quick. The impact would have killed her instantaneously, but her death was hard to take. He thought it would be easier for his son to handle since he had grown up, and at first he was right. There was an emptiness in their lives now, and Andrew and his son tried to move on, even together, but the emptiness was still there. Several months passed, and the pain faded slowly, only to be replaced by a pain felt nationwide. That day the Twin Towers fell. Andrew's son answered the call like many during that time and joined the Marines like his father. From then on, Iraq was more than a place on a map in the news. Andrew prayed daily for his son, but the news reports were not helping. More soldiers were killed by an IED almost on a daily basis. He received letters from Matt describing his life as an infantryman in Iraq. Andrew cherished those letters and kept them in a special wooden box. *********. It was late in the summer when Andrew watched a black car with government plates pull up his driveway. An officer in dress uniform stepped out of the car and walked to the front door with an envelope in his hand. Andrew's heart sank, and when he answered the door he was almost in a trance as the officer spoke, apologizing for the bad news he was delivering and offered condolences for his loss. Andrew took the envelope, but never opened it. He left it on the kitchen table, and it sat there for days. Even after his son's funeral, Andrew came back from the funeral service in silence. The envelope seemed to stare at Andrew from the table, and it filled him with dread knowing he couldn't have been there to comfort his son in his final moment. Weeks passed. The funeral service was long over. The condolence cards stopped coming. Andrew was alone in his house, surrounded by wreaths and flowers from friends and family. He collapsed and tears streamed down his face. Eventually the tears dried, but the grief remained, not just for Matt, but returned for Andrew's wife. The pain and anger grew and overwhelmed him. Andrew began to drown his memories with liquor and questioned the point of his existence. After months of binge drinking, Andrew sobered up enough to have an epiphany. Sorrow and self-pity were getting him nowhere. It was time to move on. Not just move on, but be a better person because of it. He decided to abandon his sheltered life and began to explore the world, not just for pleasure, but for knowledge. And the more exotic, the better. Andrew took the time to better himself. He learned multiple languages and travels that not only benefited him, but his companies as well. He still did not buy lavish things, but he enjoyed his money. Every trip he took was a chance to learn. Andrew would avoid going to where the tourists stayed and sought a real experience to learn the natives' customs and more. This took him to places where few dared to travel, but the risk was well worth the reward. He would hear street stories and legends of people, creatures, and places, some too incredible to believe, but seemed to be based on some truth. Andrew became a collector of these stories, and often the relics they were about. From he found that there was truth to myths and legends, and he was slowly becoming obsessed with one in particular. There was a temple that had many names. It depended on where you heard or read the tale. No matter where you saw or heard it, the tale was always set in the mountains. The Himalayas seemed the most logical location. In the tale, the temple contained the ultimate knowledge, and if it was true, knowledge that would give him absolute power. Andrew focused all of his energy to make this tale a reality. He poured funds into all avenues of research from scientific to paranormal. Within a few years, he was ready for his journey. The expedition to the Himalayas consisted from everything low-tech like the native Sherpa to the high-tech like up-to-the-minute satellite mapping and tracking. Andrew had hired the best of the best in mountain climbing, survival, guides, medical staff, and security. They had helicopters and every state-of-the-art vehicle designated to conquer the snow and ice. But they would learn that nature conquered all. For the first few days, smiles were wide on everyone's face. What they faded as the terrain became more difficult. The Sherpa laughed to themselves as the monstrosities their employers promised would make their journey easier were frequently becoming stuck in the ice. Several hours were spent digging these vehicles so they could progress a few yards before getting stuck again. The days they spent digging out their machines dug into their supplies as well, and the valley they entered made turbulence too dangerous for the helicopters to fly through, and they were forced to send them back to base camp. The glacier the expedition was traveling on was a mixed terrain of hardened ice, thousands of years old, and fresh soft snow that had been falling since the morning. The combination caused their vehicles to sink in the soft patches of snow as they drove and be shredded by the ice. Within a few days, the expedition was down to just one of their vehicles, which was now barely limping along. The expedition had replaced the vehicles they lost with pack animals that they couldn't carry as much as the machines, so they had to decide what of their equipment to leave behind, and the loss of their vehicles also meant the expedition was exposed to the cold, harsh winds. The cold winter didn't just bite. It gnawed at the expedition as they walked, as they set up camp, and as they slept. After a week and a half of travel, they were greeted by a calm day that morning. It was still cold enough to give anyone second thoughts, but not enough to deter Andrew Sullivan. When the last of their vehicles broke down, Andrew climbed out and continued on foot without a word of complaint. The expedition stopped to rest despite Andrew's protest when they found themselves surrounded by masked men in furs aiming rifles at them. One of the Sherpa explained that they were bandits and the expedition had entered their territory. Andrew spoke to them in their own language and explained to them his journey. They laughed at him for believing in legends. The bandits suggested that he turn around, but not until after they gave them all their supplies and clothes. Andrew tried to reason with them, but was given an ultimatum by the bandit chief. Give them what they asked for, or they would take what they wanted from their corpses. Andrew pleaded with the bandits and approached their chief with promises of cash that would be theirs if they would just let them leave. Our eyes lit up once they heard money was involved, and the bandit chief demanded to see the money, and Andrew agreed. Instead of cash, Andrew pulled a pistol from his pocket and fired 2 rounds into the bandit chief and quickly fired into the other bandits that were closest to him. The mercenaries Andrew hired immediately opened fire and killed the rest of the bandits. As the life faded out of the bandit chief, Andrew explained to him that he had come too far to turn around. Now, Andrew called for his physician. The physician thought Andrew was injured when he called for him, but it was just time for his medication. The truth was that it would soon be Andrew's time to go. Several years ago, he was diagnosed with lung cancer, but kept it to himself so it wouldn't affect his companies. He secretly moved funds to research a cure, but that eventually became research for a means to hold the cancer so he could take this journey. Andrew only had enough medication to last him a few more days. If he failed, he had no intention of returning home, and running out of medication made no difference. But he was relieved to know that all of his affairs were in order. Andrew took care of everything a year before this journey. He made sure he appointed a new CEO for his companies under the guise of taking his long-deserved retirement. He even made sure that the families of the expedition were taken care of, if any of them, even if they made it back. But if he succeeded, he wouldn't have to worry about the medication anymore, or anything else for that matter. The wire were so close now, and Andrew could recognize the landmarks described in the tale about the path to the temple. It would be over soon, and when they reached the last of the landmarks, a cave the temple, they made camp for the night. The next morning, there was some anxiety from the Sherpa. None of them had ever been this far, and warned that they were entering an area that eve, and the legendary Yeti would not enter. Andrew decided that he would take in a small team that included himself, 2 of the Sherpa that were willing to go, a couple of pack animals, his physician, and a handful of his security detail. The team cautiously entered the cave, and Andrew found himself admiring the drawings that depicted the temple in question. Slowly and carefully the team walked through part of the cave that was a passage through a glacier. They noticed as some of the path crumbled away and fell as they walked over it. It was difficult to gauge the depth of the drop, as visibility was only a few feet from their lights. The silence was suddenly broken by a loud cracking sound that was growing louder by the second. Andrew and his team moved as quickly as they could, but it wasn't fast enough. Both pack animals, 1 of the Sherpa and 2 of the security detail, tumbled off the path and into the darkness. It fell silent again before Andrew gathered what was left of his team and moved on. The path led them back outside, and in the distance was a wooden temple. As they walked closer, they could see that the temple was untouched by ice. There were flowers blooming at the entrance. It looked like someone had been looking after the temple. There was no dirt, and the flowers and plants around the entrance appeared to have been rim. Andrew led his team inside the temple. The temple appeared to have been built over the face of the mountain, as the mountain provided the back wall of the temple. In the center of that wall was a portal with a glossy surface like an oil slick. Andrew set down his pack and walked towards the portal, despite his physician begging him to do the opposite. Andrew could hear a voice address him. "Welcome," it said. "You have traveled far, and you have a question that burns inside you. There is no need for you to speak. I already know your question, but are you ready to know?" The answer. The physician watched Andrew as he stood there, almost frozen, staring into the portal, muttering to himself. A moment later, Andrew began to laugh, and laughed loudly and deeply the physic. Ian cautiously walked up to Andrew and asked him what was so funny. Andrew was still laughing when he turned to the physician and said, "Don't you see? We are all phone." Story 4. Rabbits in the Creek. I'm writing this because my family won't talk about it anymore. I'm the only one who can't seem to forget. I was raised on the outskirts of Preston, a small town in southern Idaho. With a population of around 5,000, my more immediate community was an isolated, dead-end dirt road called Bear Creek. Less than 20 families live on the Bear Creek. I didn't mind being so isolated. I grew up in the comfort of wide fields and close neighbors that only rural people know. We were a Mormon community, very church-centered, very community-centered. All the young girls, myself included, were part of the young women's group, and all of the boys were members of the local Boy Scout troop, which doubled as a church group in our area. We had 4th of July parties at the local ballpark and swam in the nearby reservoir. It was a good, quiet community. My house, a 92-year-old farmhouse built by my great-great-grandfather, was situated on a small hill surrounded by a wide grass field on one side and a snaking dirt road on the other. Across the road was the creek bottoms. Southern Idaho is categorized in a desert climate, so not much grows outside of the irrigated fields. Besides sagebrush and burrs, the creek bottoms were the exception. The creek fed the growth of a thick tangle of pussy willow bushes. In the late fall, we used to go down into the bottoms and pick the white, cottony pussy willow seeds to decorate the fences of our driveway. Being so isolated, it wasn't uncommon for animals to come down from the mountains. We had a female moose who brought her calf down and lived in our orchard every winter, and the occasional lion wasn't unheard of either. The summer when I turned 8, I remember because it was the same year as my baptism. A smaller mountain lion was spotted several times in our area. We weren't worried. The big cats stayed away from the farms and usually moved on when the area didn't yield enough food. The summer my neighbor, Peyton, was working on his Eagle Scout project. He loved National Geographic and thought it would be pretty cool to try putting together a National Geographic submission on our little creek bottoms. The young lion that happened to be in our area at the same time made him especially excited. He decided he wanted to try and get pictures of the lion and email the National Geographic team for advice. They recommended setting up an automatic camera that takes shots every couple of seconds in an area the lion was known to visit. They also recommended setting some kind of bait so the lion was more likely to come by. No one in the creek liked the idea of live bait or carrion, so we came up with a different kind of bait. We decided to set up an audio recording of a dying rabbit and play it on a loop through a set of speakers hidden in the willows. I remember when everyone was down in the bottoms testing the speakers, and I heard the noise for the first time. The sound of a dying rabbit is horrible. It's been described as being almost identical to the sound of a screaming child. If you've never heard it yourself, there's plenty of recordings available online. It's worth a listen. The camera was set up, the speakers were set up. Everything was perfect. Peyton explained that he would allow the camera and recording to play uninterrupted for a week, and then he would go check on it This would give time for our scent to fade from the bottoms and encourage the lion to come closer. At first I was worried about the eyes. It was a truly horrible nose, and our house was the closest to the setup point in the bottoms. My father assured me that the nose wouldn't reach as far as our house, and I was relieved and we arrived home that night, and he was correct. The bottoms were far enough away that I couldn't hear anything. I remember Peyton the next day at church. He was fidgety and excited to see a CK on the equipment, but he had to wait a week, which everybody kept reminding him. He couldn't risk going down too early and scaring the lion away for good. That night I woke up to an awful noise. I sat ramrod straight in my bed with my eyes wide in the dark, hands clutched so hard my palms bore the indent of my fingernails for hours after. I knew that noise. It was the recording of the rabbit. It sounded faint and far off, like it really could have been coming from the bottoms, but that was impossible, because the recording had been going all night the previous day, and I hadn't heard a thing. I didn't sleep that night. I was too scared to get out of bed and wake my parents. The recording played over and over again. I had the loop memorized. In the morning, I stumbled into the kitchen for breakfast. My mom and dad were sitting at the kitchen table. They too had dark rings under their eyes. I hadn't been the only one who'd heard it. Mom was convinced that the equipment must have been broken. She wanted to go down into the bottoms to check it out. Dad refused. He was a kind, gentle man and didn't want to stir up any unnecessary drama. He was sure there had been a strong wind last night, and the wind was carrying the noise farther than its natural reach. He told us to listen. We did. He was right. We couldn't hear it. Now we forgot about it and went about our daily goings. The next night it happened again. I stayed up in bed with my back to the wall. The screaming was even louder than before, but this time something was different. It was lower pitched than I remember, and parts of the loop were slowed down, as if the recording were warped in places. At times the loop did not loop naturally, and AD picked up at a random place in the middle. My mom didn't mention anything at the breakfast table, but both her and my dad seemed tense. The third night, I mustered the courage to stand beside my bedroom window and look out into the yard. For a moment I stood, rooted to the spot, my hands shaking no matter how hard I clenched them. The nose sidled, and through the cracks in the window I watched the outline of the trees in the yard, perfectly still. Not even the slightest breeze stirred their branches. My mom announced that she would be going to visit her sisters in town the next day and would probably spend the night there. She invited me to come along, but I was a daddy's girl at heart and chose to stay at the farm. I took Mom's place beside Dad in their bed that night, but even that didn't help. I don't think my dad was asleep either, for he was unnaturally still the whole night. We began to hear the noise during the day, too. I was drawing with chalk on the sidewalk when it happened. My shoulders tensed down. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled. There was only one scream, a short, high-pitched one, and then the recording fell silent. It happened again several times throughout the day, but never the whole loop, just clips from it. Later that evening, Peyton's dad came up the driveway on his four-wheeler. He said he was looking for their dog, a sweet yellow lab who had been missing since that morning. Dad said he was sorry and that we hadn't seen her. I stared at him, silently begging him to mention the recording. Boo. He didn't. He was a quiet man after all. He didn't want to bring up any unnecessary drama. Mom stayed away the whole week. Dad and I didn't sleep. By Saturday, the screaming could be heard constantly, though it seemed to have deviated from the familiar loop entirely. I didn't recognize any of it. Sometimes the screams were thin and long. Other times they were hardly more than growls. Once, wow, my dad had been heating up meat loaf for lunch. The nose rose into such a rancorous din that he dropped the plate and it shattered. I pressed my hands over my ears where I sat at the table and squeezed my eyes shut, but it didn't help. The nose forced its way in through the cracks of my fingers and pinched my throat and rattled in my rib cage. The din lasted for a whole minute, then fell silent. Dad was shaking. That was the last we heard of the nose that day. Peyton came by Saturday evening to ask permission to cross our road to collect the equipment. He was so excited. I watched him disappear into the creek bottoms with a sense of tired relief. After the equipment was gone, it would all stop. I couldn't wait to get a full night's sleep. Not a minute later, I spotted Peyton coming back up from the creek. I was confused. It had taken us much longer to set up the camera and speakers, so I'd only assumed it would take just as long to collect them. My breath stilled when Peyton came closer. He didn't look right. His eyes were wide and his face pale. Something wet dribbled from his chin and onto his shirt. I later realized it was vomit. My dad caught him before he fell and demanded to know what had happened. Peyton couldn't speak. He'd just cry. We called his dad. I looked after Peyton as both my dad and his dad went into the bottoms. They were gone a long time. When they returned, their faces were grim and they smelled funny. I noticed red on my dad's hands. I asked what was wrong, but they brushed right past me and immediately called the police. Nobody would tell me what had happened. I sat on the couch as a blur of neighbors and police officers swirled around me. At one point, an officer placed something on the kitchen table and left. I looked into the kitchen curiously. It was the camera from the bottoms. I wish I hadn't looked. The camera was a little banged up. Tiny scratches and dents covered the plastic casing. When I lifted it, my hands stuck to the plastic. Something tacky and odorous covered the screen, but it turned on fine. The first set of photos were normal, just the pussy willows cast green in the glow of the night setting. As I continued to click through them, they quickly became strange. At one point, the camera angle changed, as if the camera had been knocked from its post. Ross now obscured most of the frame. Flecks of red appeared on the lens and remained for the rest of the sets. One photo made me pause. There was a figure in this one, or half of a figure as most of His upper torso hadn't made it into the frame. I thought it could be human, but it didn't look like it should be standing upright. Its legs were twisted, like an animal, and seemed to be having difficulty supporting itself in an upright position. Beside the legs, a long, thin arm hung. Whatever it was must have been stooped over, for its fingertips hung below its crooked knees. The next set was different. It was as if the camera had been picked up and was now being held. The first photo was of the bottoms at night. The next startled me. I had to look closely before deciding what it was. A rabbit had been laid in the bushes, but its ears and most of its scalp had been peeled away. The next was of the same rabbit, but a thin, dark hand was holding it up against the sky. Its limp body hung like something from a nightmare. In the following photos, more rabbits joined the one, each with their ears and scalp removed. Then a cat, then more cats, then a dog, the yellow lab, then the lion. The following photo was of 7 rabbits, 3 cats, 1 dog, and the lion, all laid out in a row facing the same way. Their arms and legs had been arranged as if they were marching, like some parade. All of their scalps had been removed, and tiny white glints of their skulls could be seen. The last photo was overly bright, like the photo had been taken to close with the flash on, and I dominated the frame, but it was yellowed and crusty, and had a bar pupil like a horse. In the bottom corner, the edge of a mouth could be seen. No lips, just teeth. Sharp and little, with wide gaps of red gum between them. I wish I hadn't looked. I heard my dad talking to the police outside. They said the speakers had malfunctioned. The recording had on. Lee played the first night, story 5. What's in the woods? I'm a sleepwalker. I've woken up on the floor, and the hedges outside, and half hanging out of the refrigerator with orange juice spilled down the front of my shirt, just to name a few. Most of the time it would end in uncontrollable laughter from my 2 roommates, and thankfully over time my embarrassment wore off. Last fall that all changed. My roommates and I attend college in a fairly rural Midwest area, so the nightlife consists mostly of house parties and bonfires in cornfields. One Saturday night, my roommates and I were driving down a gravel road to the family farm of a friend when our high beams hit something about 200 yards down the road on our side. It looked like someone walking, so we thought maybe a fellow partygoer had some vehicular troubles, though we hadn't seen any abandoned vehicles on the way in. We turned off the high beams, and as we got closer we saw that it was a red-haired girl in a white dress that almost matched the fairness of her skin. I was in the passenger seat, so I rolled down the window and stuck my head out as Thomas slowed the car. "Hey, do you eat a rye?" I tried to call out in the friendliest voice possible to alleviate any fears that may be caused by a carful of guys approaching a girl by herself in the woods. As Thomas continued slowing the car down, I could hear the gravel crunching underneath us, and eventually we came to a halt. The girl stopped walking and turned toward us. She looked at me and smiled, a sweet but knowing expression that hid the mild humor I saw in her bright green eyes. She was very pretty, her hair a deep shade of shining dark red against her flawless pale skin. "I'm fine, thank you. I just like to walk," she said, sounding distant but very sure of herself. "Are you sure? It's pretty dark out here. No telling what's in these woods," Dave chimed in from the back seat. Her AS darted quickly to the source of the question, and she issued a firm "I can take care of myself," and began walking again. "All right," exhaled Thomas. "I guess we'll see her when she gets there." So I said a quick "see you later," rolled the window back up, and we rolled slowly past the girl and down the road. The party was pretty fun that night, but for some reason I couldn't get that girl out of my head. I kept looking around, trying to make sure she had made it safely, but I never saw her. I asked others at the party if they passed her on the way in. but no one recalled seeing any pedestrians outside of the town. There was something about her that I found intriguing, maybe even a little unsettling, but I attributed the latter to our remote location and fearing for the girl's safety. Dave suggested that maybe she lived around there and was just going for a stroll, but the only residence within 15 miles of that place was another farm that had been abandoned for over 50 years, so I wasn't convinced. Eventually, the party died down and we got ready to leave. I hadn't been in much of a drinking mood, so I was sober to drive the three of us home. We piled in the car, Thomas and me in the front, and Dave sprawled out in the back on the brink of unconsciousness. Several folks had left earlier to go out to a bar in town, so once again we found ourselves alone on the gravel road with the darkness so black it seemed solid surrounding anything our high beams and taillights didn't touch. About 3 miles from the party and another 4 or 5 miles from the road into town that connects to the gravel road, we spotted something on the ground beside the road ahead of us. At first we thought someone had tossed a white bag of trash out of their window to avoid dumpster fees, but as we neared we saw what it actually was. The red-haired girl. Thomas let out an appropriate "what the fuck," and I nodded in agreement. She seemed to be sitting with her knees pulled to her chest and her head tucked into her arms, which were folded on top of her legs. My stomach immediately sank when I realized it was her. I knew we should have picked her up. She's probably been sitting here the whole time, scared and alone. I figured that was why my gut was not letting me forget about this person. She didn't raise her head or look up at all as we pulled up beside her, and Thomas rolled his window down. "Hey, sweetheart, you okay?" Thomas asked through his open window. No response. "Hey, can you hear me? Can we please take you somewhere safe?" Before Thomas could even finish enunciating the word safe, I heard him make a horrible guttural sound, like he was choking on his words, and he frantically began scrambling to get away from the window. As he began struggling, I saw the girl past him for a split second, and she still appeared not to have budged since we first spotted her. Finally, Thomas caught his breath and screamed, "Go, go, 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 go," and began rolling his window up. His tone genuinely freaked me out, even though I hadn't seen or heard anything, so I took off, and we didn't look back until we hit the road that would lead us into town. "What the hell just happened back there?" I asked him. "I'm pretty sure Dave slept through the whole thing." "Mike, I swear to fucking God," Thomas began, still gasping for breath. She looked up at me, and her goddamn eyes were black. I could hear her talking in my fucking head. "Dude, what the fuck? Wait. What the hell are you talking about?" She didn't look up the whole time. I didn't hear anything. I was starting to get uneasy, but this sounded like a crazy drunk guy rambling. Oh my fucking God. "No, dude." She looked right at me, and I could hear her saying over and over, "I'm what's in the woods. I'm what's in the woods. I'm what's in the woods." But her lips weren't moving at all. He was getting me pretty good at this point. I'll be honest, I felt like a ping-pong ball was stuck in my throat. I couldn't believe Dave was still passed out. I had no idea what was going on. I know that girls seem strange, but this just seemed like something out of a horror movie. Nothing like that happens to real people, right? No, not right, not at all. We finally made it home, but not without looking in the sky. and rearview mirrors more than we looked ahead. We managed to wake Dave up and get him in the house even through Thomas' hysteria. Once we threw Dave on the bed, I went in my room to start getting ready for bed. I was scared as shit, but it was so surreal I done. Think I even processed it that night. I was just happy to be at home, where I was safe. I talked to Thomas for a while and managed to calm him down enough to go to sleep, and I promised him we would talk about it more in the morning when we had had a chance to recover from everything. The morning never came for Thomas. I laid in my bed for a while, wondering what was really going on with that girl, if she was in fact a girl, and if Thomas had really experienced what he said he had. I honestly had no idea what to believe. I tossed and turned for a while, a little jumpier than usual. Eventually, I turned on some late-night cartoons and was able to fade into sleep. I didn't dream at all. It seemed like I was asleep for a split second before I awoke again. I awoke in complete darkness, thick like the darkness in the woods. Although it was pitch black at first, I knew I was not in my room. I was on my back on a hard floor. Fuck, I thought. I've been sleepwalking again. This room had a strong smell. Not a particularly bad smell, just a strong smell of wood and insulation and mustiness, like an old and finished room. I could tell the floor was made of wood, not concrete, so I knew I wasn't in the basement. I was in the attic. Immediately I wondered how in the world I had managed, in my sleep, to push up the attic door panel in my closet ceiling and sate myself in there. Slowly I realized the faint, pale light from the TV in my bedroom was sneaking through the open attic door and casting a flickering blue glow over the attic, causing the thick blackness to retreat ever so slightly. That wasn't the only thing. I realized I wasn't alone when the TV lent its brighter flashes to the attic. I saw her. I don't even know anymore. I saw it. I saw the white dress, the pale skin, the red hair, although it looked a little different now, and it was standing in the far corner of the attic near the exposed trusses, maybe 30 feet away from them. Its face looked very different, but I couldn't see it very well. I would say that was the scariest moment of my life, but it paled in comparison to what happened next. It was as if the second I saw it saw me. Its left foot slid out first, making no sound as it moved. Then it crouched down in a squat and slowly lowered its left hand to the floor and began to walk, not roll, on all fours toward me. Frozen in fear and still lying on my back, I glanced toward the open attic door. I thought for a second that I might be able to make it to the door, but as I was trying to gather my courage, the TV turned off and I was back in the dark. With a sinking feeling, I tried to be brave and tell myself this was just a dream I was waking up from. That didn't last long. As soon as I turned my face back toward the thing approaching me, the TV flickered back on the girl. This thing, it was staring at me, maybe 6 inches from my face. Its skin was still white as snow, but grotesque-looking blue veins bulged beneath its surface. Its forehead and eyes were unnaturally large and completely black, just as Thomas had said. I noticed its fiery hair looked different, and then real. Its hair wasn't red at all. It was blonde and almost completely saturated with blood. I could see the blood running down its forehead into its black eyes and around the 2 holes where its nose should have been. The worst part was the mouth. Its thin lips curled back from pointed yellow teeth and a hideous grin that seemed to fade into the darkness on each side and never end. It was he horrific and moving visage I was staring at as the words "I'm much in the woods" rang over and over in my head in a voice that seemed to belong to something incredibly old and unfathomably evil. Even though the screaming was all in my head, it felt as though my eardrums were about to burst. Over and over I heard this phrase "I'm what's in the woods" shrieked at me from the wheezing, nearly motionless monster that was before me. It seemed to consume me, the TV light fading out until I saw nothing but the grinning face of that creature. This is the last thing I remember. I'm safe now. Thomas and Dave burned with the house, but somehow I made it outside, where I woke up. Almost everyone assumes I was sleepwalking and was already outside when the fire started. But I know what happened. The police don't believe me. But I know. I told them what happened. And I guess that's why I'm here now. Maybe they kind of think I did it. Who knows? Seems the only thing they could prove was that I'm a lunatic. I don't mind. The strong leather straps keep me in my bed at night. No worrying about where I'll wake up or what I'll do. I just go to sleep in my bed and wake up in my bed. I used to sometimes see the creature in my dreams, but they're giving me something for that now. It's not so bad. I just get a little tired sometimes. I might try to get some rest now. Story 6. The Blackwoods of Beaumont Chase. Daniel Warrington leapt to his feet. The fire roared and crackled in the hearth, and the wine gusted outside, and for a second he doubted whether he had heard it. A second, heavier crash, like a great clap of thunder, swiftly relieved him of such foolish notions. He rushed across the drawing-room, his plush burgundy smoking jacket pillow hung out behind him, shoving aside an armchair and his haste, and emerged into the entrance hall to see the stout oak doors rattling in their frame. He snatched the Sharp's Model 1874 from its stand above the fireplace and dashed across the brilliant marble floor, feeding a new cartridge from the stash in the pocket of his smoking jacket into the chamber. Too late, he flung open the doors wide to catch the briefest glimpse of an immense bulk retreating into the circle of trees. He returned his attention to the doors. Deep gouges in the wood, the lower panels splintered and dent. He slammed his fist against the door frame in frustration, ignoring the hot lance of pain that pierced his hand. Daniel Warrington had had enough. This was the third incident of its kind to occur since his taking up residence in Night Hill Manor 2 months previous, pausing only to pull on a pair of worn leather boots and a dimmer brown scarf. He considered rousing his manservant, Dunois Lode Marston, to accompany him, but decided against the idea. The old man was probably tucked up in bed by now. There was no reason to disturb him. Whatever it was that walked the woods Beaumont Chase and menaced the manor, Daniel Warrington would deal with it himself. After all, hadn't he faced down enormous black bears during his months on the continent? Looked death in the sharp yell, low eyes deep within Peruvian rainforests, slain a great white lion, king of the African plains, with nothing but a blade and his bare hands. Determined and resolute, Daniel Warrington strode out to meet the night. The air was frozen and the skies empty. Before him at the clearing's edge loomed the woods, a vast black wall of frostbitten limbs and flaking bark, the wine. At least it was probably the wine, howled between the slender trunks and seethed in the clusters of tall dark pines. Pale icicles, thin and crooked like skeletal fingers, scintillated as Christmas baubles, hung afar on a tree, a black, dead tree. As he crossed the clearing, his hand fell to the limmat belted at his hip. Deemed far too superfluous and unreliable for field use by the U.S. Army, he had managed to procure one of the few remaining prototypes from a customs officer up in Birmingham. In addition to the revolver and the sharps, he carried a long, thick knife with an elaborate earbone handle sheathed at his waist, a gift from an elderly knife-maker by the name of James Black several years previous. The blade had since tasted the blood of almost every animal that walked, crawled, or swam upon the face of the earth. Regretting not taking the time to change out of his smoking jacket, Daniel Warrington gritted his teeth and trudged on through the biting load. Tracking the mysterious beast was proving to be exceedingly difficult. Having neglected, in his haste, to bring a lantern, it was all he could do to discern the sporadic trail of odd, hoof-like prints. Their distinctive cleft, although somewhat more pronounced, reminded him of the tracks of the curious black and white striped deer that ran freely across the African plains with but a single difference. These were sunk far too deeply in the snow, incongruous with the weight of such an animal. Whatever the beast was, it was of a most prodigious size. For minutes that dragged like hours he plodded onwards by the sickly light of the moon, the only sound that of fresh snow crunching beneath his boots. The wind nipped cruelly at his exposed face and hands, bringing with it a faint mist that flowed around him in shreds and tatters, snatching at his clothing with ghostly and substantial fingers. His every breath fogged the air with an ephemeral white cloud and seemed to draw the sea, heaping chill ever deeper into his body. Something moved in the outer darkness of his periphery. By the time he had leveled the sharps it was gone, if it had ever been there. All the darkness was enfolding now, a great, all-encompassing blackness held at bay only by thin shafts of moonlight. A branch snapped to his right, and he whirled in time to see a dislodged clump of snow thud to the ground. Taking a deep breath, he once again leveled the sharps. His mind was calm and still, a vast frozen lake in midwinter's grasp. The weight of the stock in the hollow of his shoulder felt good. It felt right. It had been far too long since he'd seen the spark of life fade from the eyes of a dying animal. Slowly, cautiously now, he picked high, way between peeling silver birches and over the fallen trunks of once magnificent oaks. Alert to even the smallest motion, he hunted in silence, pressing onwards into the woods, deeper than ever before. Eventually the tracks halted at a great twisted snarl of brambles stretching taller than a man. There was no sign of his quarry passing through, and truly the tracks continued in no other direction, and fighting back disquiet at the idea of an animal so large capable of clearing such a barrier with a single leap, Daniel Warrington slung the sharps over his back and unsheathed his knife. He would need to act swiftly now, stumbling forth from a narrow tunnel of thorn and tangle. Daniel Warrington emerged into a misted clearing. Damp from the moisture in the air, lank locks of hair clung to his forehead. His face and hands were sliced in several places, and his smoking jacket was all but ruined. Dunwald Marston would not be amused. He straightened and unslung the sharps, taking stock of his surroundings. The wall of brambles encircled the entire clearing, and it appeared he had forced his way through at one of the lowest points. In places the brambles grew around the overhanging branches of nearby trees, crawling along their drooping limbs like sinister barbed snakes. All across the clearing spires of rock jutted upwards from the mists their twisted and scraping the caligenous skies. Small, trembling gouts of white had begun to spiral down, but Daniel Warrington barely noticed. His attention was elsewhere. It was not often that Daniel Warrington found himself at a loss for words now. He could barely remember to breathe. Dominating the center of the clearing and towering over its surroundings was a dark cyclopean monolith of impossibly immense proportions. Plainly visible upon its surface were an array of nightmarish bas-reliefs, upon which the gibbous moon shone sickeningly. Thin tendrils of mist curled up and around the high dais obelisk, crashing against its sides like churning ethereal waves. Mother Nature took a deep breath, and the night itself fell still. Deep within the mists, something moved. Clack, clack, clack. He could feel it now. The beast's eyes were upon him. The fine, downy hairs on the back of his neck stood erect, and his skin rippled with goose flesh. Clack, clack, clack. The Sioux Indie echoed hollowly across the clearing. He sighted down the barrel of the sharps and willed his trembling hands to still. Shifting anxiously beneath the gaze of that loathsome monolith, he watched and waited. Dot, dot, clack, clack, clack. The stag shambled forth from the swirling mist, a blackened crown of jagged antlers twisting in all directions adorned its head as the beast sauntered. It passed the monolith. The tips of those dreadful antlers screeched across the black stone. The sharps dropped from Daniel Warrington's shaking hands, clattering away across the ground. The stag's jaw lolled wide, revealing a maw bulging with pointed yellow teeth, akin to those of the sleek tiger-striped sharks of the West Pacific. Only now did he understand the truly monstrous proportions of the beast. Its head stood fully twice the height of a man, above which loomed the terrible antlers. The monster's snout glistened weightily in the waxing moonlight, and its tattered fur seemed to crawl and shift as though it were a living carpet of chitinous beetles. Patches of yellowing bone shone through its coat. Fur and skin clung to its forelegs in patches, like moss to the trunk of a rotten tree. Dark rivulets of blood trickled from the hollows of the beast's eyes, a pair of vast, empty holes in which green flames guttered and billowed. The stag snorted, stamping its foot with a sharp crack like a gunshot, causing a murder of sleek black crows to take erupt in flight from a nearby tree. Coils of mist drifted lazily around the beast, never quite coming close enough to touch its slick black fur. Its hooves were blooded bone, heavy enough to crush a man's skull to dust beneath their tread. And then it spoke, a guttural, rasping sound abhorrent to the minds of men. At this, some hidden string pulled taut in fear, finally snapped, and the lima leapt into Daniel Warrington's hand as if it had been there all along. He flipped the lever on the end of T. He hammered up, causing the striker to fall upon the primer set. Directly below it, the stag let out a monstrous bellow, lowered its head, and charged. Daniel Warrington took careful aim, drawing a bead atop the beast's skull. The stag roared, as did the lemat. The blast of buckshot from the revolver's secondary barrel disintegrated the top of the stag's head. Something cool and dark pulsated amidst the ruin of its skull. Shifting and oozing against the splintered bone, the beast hardly faltered. Daniel Warrington would only stare, horrified, as the wound immediately began to heal, bone reforming before his very eyes. The skin, however, remained absent, and he at once understood the significance of the many bald patches speckling the creature's eye. How many before him had and failed to slay this dark, majestic horror? Razor-sharp antlers gored his stomach, and then he was tumbling across the frosted earth towards the monolith. He pressed a hand to his stomach and felt what seemed to be a handful of snakes squirming against his palm. Blood seeped between his fingers. Clack, clack, clack. The stag towered over him now, whispering blasphemous insanities of the old gods which dwelt beneath the earth and deep down in the seas and in the dark, forgotten places of the world where the stars had never shone. Dreadful images began to form in his mind of nameless monstrosities uncoiling beneath the earth and Polyphemus-like creatures emerging from the oceans. The insignificance of man crashed down upon him, followed momentarily by the stag's hoof, which fell with a sickening crunch. The splitting of a ripe melon. Daniel Warrington thought no more. Dunwald Marston sat in the darkened library, reading by the gut. Tearing flame of a candle burnt nearly down to the stub. A leather-bound tome of substantial thickness, the Midwinter World. But the book was Midwinter World in name only. The cover concealed a far more sinister tome, one which had previously resided for many years under lock and key in a sub-basement of the British Museum, hidden by fools who possessed neither the strength of mind nor the sea urge to conquer the horrors bound within the book's wafer thin pages. From the walls of the room, glassy eyes reflected the candle light, inch-long yellowing fangs frozen in snarls of anger and roars of defiance. It sundered Dunwald's heart to see such beautiful, magnificent creatures murdered for the cruel sport of a single man. His gaze wandered to the umbrella stand in the far corner, fashioned from the foot of a majestic white rhino, and he felt the familiar fires of hatred flare up in his chest. That Warrington had the nerve, the gall to slaughter even a single one of Zoo's precious children grated on Dunwald's very sense of being. Well, it would not happen again. Ishmael would see to that. Thin, wavering shafts of moonlight filtered through the picture window, picky, out every scar and crag on Dunwald's stand. Calloused hands, the hands of one who has spent a lifetime in the wilderness, wandering the secret and tame places of the earth. The book at his fingertips remained dim and dark, the light itself refusing to touch such blasphemous pages. This suited Dunwald perfectly. Some things were born only to dwell in darkness. Dunwald drew the flea, carrying candle closer, leant forward, and continued to read. From the earth where groweth dark wood, into any time when the rites are spoken, can the holder of the knowledge summon the walker, child of great Duzu, he who dwelleth in the vast wilderness between the worlds, and eateth the soul and flesh of man, he that roams when the moon wanes yellow, and is called Ishmael, only in supply. Cat-eyed to the walker of the worlds between, can one escape the wrath of Duzu? Story 7. The Ladder. The ladder hadn't been there this morning, of this I was certain, nor had it been there before in all the time I'd known this house. And it's not that I don't know it well. It used to belong to my grandparents, and I spent many a summer here. I know the building inside and out, every nook and cranny, as only a child possibly could. I know this ladder doesn't belong here, that the house doesn't even have an attic. The slope of the roof I almost fell from on more than one occasion during my early teens, is too shallow to offer anything in the way of storage space. That's why I keep so much junk in the basement. Rarely, but still occasionally, appliances, holiday decorations, and furniture I simply couldn't bring myself to part with when I inherited the place. And yet there it was in front of me, a ladder, its gnarled wooden rails thoroughly at odds with the upstairs landing around it. It was carved roughly from some dark, almost black wood, not a variety I recognized. Although I don't claim to be an expert on wood, I'd seen enough horror films in my time to know what would happen if I were to go up there. Although I didn't let that stop me taking a look up, standing in front of the impossible hatch in my ceiling and tilting my head back, I saw rafters, insulation, more or less what I expected to see. Deciding there was nothing to fear, I decided to make my way up there. With the benefit of hindsight, I can honestly say this was the worst decision of my life. As I passed through the rectangular aperture above me, I felt as though I was moving through some form of thick gel, rasping against my skin and stinging my eyes. I loosed them and continued feeling blindly until I felt my head come free of the strange sensation. I opened my eyes. The room one found myself in was dark, lit only from a circular window on the FAR wall. The weak beam of light did little to illuminate the place, not reaching far enough to show me any walls beside the one the window was nestled in, which was made of the same dark wood as the ladder, this time cut into rough, splinter-filled planks. There was a curious smell to the place. Although it was faint enough that I couldn't quite place it back then, I crept over to the window, reasoning that a peek outside wouldn't hurt. I'd expected to see the familiar lawn, the familiar street, the mailbox sitting in the ground at a slight angle. I still recalled catching that with my car 2 weeks ago, the oak tree, which still had a homemade swing attached, the bird bath, the gravel driveway, the field across from me, more or less the American dream incarnate. Really, instead, what I saw was impossible. The image has never truly left my mind. Low in the pitch-black, starless sky was an eclipsed sun, a halo of light, almost white but with a purple tint. This narrow disk illuminated a wasteland, a cruel parody of the world across from me. The oak tree a fungus-encrusted stump, the bird bath a heap of rubble, the field across the road no thing but black, withered, long dead stalks. I tore my eyes away, finding they had adjusted to the semi-darkness. I could make out the room a little clearer now, clear enough to see several mounds of rags and crates, along with furniture, or at least what looked to be furniture, covered by dust sheets the same purple-tinted white as the sunlight in this impossible place. I bent down, lifting the corner of the nearest one, and finding myself looking at a bookcase ornately carved from the now somewhat familiar blackwood. It was completely full, too, leather-bound tomes covering each and every shelf. I picked one at random, taking it down and letting it fall open in my hands. Curious symbols swirled around on the page, which may once have been white but had faded through yellow and well into brown with age. I didn't recognize the language, although I know less about written languages than I do about wood. I took a year of Spanish back in high school, but I didn't even come close to passing. I tucked the strange book under my arm and made my way back to the ladder, hearing the floorboards creak under my feet as I did so, feeling the strange, rasping gel rub envelop me as I made my way back down into the familiar world. The book was still with me. I made my way downstairs and was about to make my way into the sitting room tower, and I realized how dusty the book was. Clearly, the dust sheet it was under hadn't worked. The dust was just as wrong as everything else from above that ladder. Rather than being gray, gray-white, it was a reddish-brown, almost rust-colored. Deciding against getting any of that on the sofa, I continued down to the familiar concrete walls and wooden floor of the basement. It took me a moment to find my grandmother's old writing desk. Moved down here when I inherited the place to make way for a television. I'd read one or two of my grandmother's stories over the years. She was a rather talented horror writer. I remember my parents always objected to her letting me read her work, claiming it gave me nightmares. But I turned out okay, although I admit, looking back on these events, I made some terrible decisions. I set down the leather-bound book and pulled up a chair taken from the dining room. I ate enough microwave meals to not need more than one or two chairs in there, and so the remaining four were down. Here, sitting down, I opened the book to a random page and saw nothing. The page was empty. As I flicked through the rest of the heavy tome, I discovered all the pages were blank. Could it be that the books were only readable up there in the attic? Realizing this made as much sense as anything else that had happened since I arrived home from work, I stood up, leaving the book where it was, and started towards the kitchen to grab a flashlight from the emergency kit I kept under the sink. But as I stood up, I heard a crashing sound from somewhere above. Emmy, the alarm system hadn't gone off. Why, grandfather always was paranoid, so it couldn't have been a home invasion. Whatever had made the noise was already inside the house. It sounded close, too. I turned towards the stairs and saw a shadow atop them, cast against the plain wall and the light coming from the utility room, a shadow of nothing on earth. In the few seconds I saw it before diving under the writing desk to cower in fear, I caught a glimpse of tentacles and fur and muscles all in one writhing mass. I don't know how long I sat there, listening to the shapeless horde drag its body around the room, wincing with each heavy footfall. I was crammed into that space, eyes wide, fighting the urge to vomit as the stench of decay crept into my mouth. The footsteps grew closer, and it passed right by me. I heard its breath, ragged and continuous, as though it were coming from several mouths, connected to several sets of lungs. I looked away as it drew near, hearing the chair scrape against the floor, feeling the wooden legs press against my body, hoping the creature wouldn't think to look under the desk. After what felt like an eternity of fear and the stink of decay, I heard it moving away again and allowed myself to let out a slow, silent breath. It still sounded near, though I didn't risk peeking out from under the old writing desk. Not until after I heard the heavy footfalls on the stairs back out of the basement. And even then, I sat there for a few minutes, rooted to the spot, standing up and stretching. I realized the book was gone, the wood of the desk had darkened where it had been, and the smooth surface around it was covered in scratch marks. I crept back out of the basement, weaving my way past furniture and boxes of decorations and my grandfather's old toolbox. I paused at the last one, picking out a heavy wrench and slotting it into my belt. No sense in going into this unarmed, even though I didn't know the first thing about fighting another human, let alone that thing, that creature up there. I know this was as bad an idea at the time as it is in hindsight. The fact remains, though, I didn't want that thing, that whatever it was, in my house. Creeping my way through the house to the kitchen, listening out for the sound of footfalls, of rattling, continuous breath, hoping I wouldn't encounter that stench again for as long as I lived. I made it back up to the ladder without encountering the creature aga, and I couldn't tell whether that creature was up there, but if it was, I thought as my hand went for the wrench, I was as ready to deal with it as I would ever be. The rasping sensation against my skin was familiar now, and I knew to keep my eyes closed. Opening them after reaching the impossible attic, I took a cautious look around, checking for that formless horror before pulling up the rest of my body. The room was empty, save for furniture and crates. I reached for the flashlight and flicked it on. The first thing I noticed was the lack of a window. The wall itself had changed. Plain concrete rather than wood paneling, and as I cast the flashlight's narrow beam around the room, examining the assorted crates and dust-sheet-covered furniture, I found the bookcase once again and saw the empty space where that curious tome filled with swirling symbols had been. I picked up another book at random, holding it with one hand and shining the flashlight on it with the other, letting it fall open at a random page once. Again, the instant my eyes fell upon the page, I felt my mind begin to expand, felt it fill with strange and impossible concepts, images of a world beyond our realm of understanding. The laws of reality, as we know it, don't apply there. It wasn't until later that I would come to realize that there was, in fact, here. Letting the book fall to the floor with a resounding thud, I turned to leave, only to see the ladder was no longer there. I scurried over to where it had been and found only smooth, dark floorboards, no place where a hatch could have been. I realized I was trapped in here, hoping to find some other exit. I began searching the room, frantically tearing down dust sheets, searching under furniture, until I found something familiar. The wooden surface was pitch black, same as all the wood in here, but the dimensions were familiar. What gave it away, though, wasn't the size or the shape or the fallen chair lying beside it. What gave it away was the familiar pattern of scratches on the surface of what used to be my grandmother's writing desk. I staggered backwards, unable to believe what I was seeing, but sure enough, as I paced around the room over and over again, I found more and more familiar items. The rest of the chairs from the dining hall, my grandfather's toolkit, a high chair I had used when I was a baby. So that brings you up to date. I'm writing this now in one of the empty tomes in the bookcase. In the world I once lived in at Wool, D have been a dictionary or Shakespeare or Dickens. My grandparents were the proud owners of several vintage novels, and though I knew I would never read them, it just didn't feel right selling them. Holding a pen is in itself a challenge now. In my shirt pocket, that I realized I could make some record of what happened to me. After all, I won't be able to tell it for much longer. Thinking is already in itself a chore. And in the time since I started this, the wood paneling on the walls has begun to return, and even as I write, I can see the circular window beginning to form. Once again, I wonder how long I have before I truly become that creature, before the latter appears once more in my life. And above all else, I wonder where the monster I become goes after tea. He human I once was ascended that ladder, that impossible ladder for the final time.